service strategy. The goal is to help service providers operate and grow successful in the long term and provide the ability to think and act in a strategic manner. So if we think about service strategy, we think about the heart of the organization. We think about leadership. We think about, and oftentimes we also think about our bid and proposal team. So in most organizations, upper management works tightly handed with our business development team because the organization wants to grow, and the business development team is the team or the function that works to release proposals and market and do all those fun things that the organization needs in order to become competitive and to win new work and new business. So service strategy is in a direct alignment with upper management and your leadership, the decision makers for the organization as a whole. The objectives of service strategy are to provide direction for growth, prioritize investments, and define customer outcomes against effectiveness of service measurement. So the last bullet, when we talk about defining outcomes, typically that information comes from people like your product manager, people like your unit owners, people like your program managers who provide information to upper management on performance, lessons learned, feedback from the client, all those great things that the organization needs to know so that they can understand how they either need to make adjustments or maybe better market themselves. If they find out that there's someone in the organization that has a new capability or knows how to do something, they can start to market themselves in that way. So those are the goals and objectives of service strategy. Pretty straightforward. Business objectives of service strategy. They set clear direction for everyone for a quicker decision. If you notice, in most organizations, it is the CEO or some senior vice president that is briefing the organization or upper management on a directive. Here's a roadmap for 2019. They clearly outline the path forward or a roadmap. Or when a big announcement about a new product or a new merger or a new vendor comes out, it usually comes from upper management. So those are the folks that have the clear direction for everyone. They help service organization prioritize investments. So these are all of your business decisions regarding investments into new tools, new technology, new training, hiring of people with specialized skill sets, partnering with other organizations who have the capabilities that that organization may not have. It also builds strategic assets, which are resources and capabilities, which add value to the business, and guides service design, service transition, and service operation in a coherent manner for effective service operations, which I've already talked about. Service design, transition, and operations execute what was established per the directive in service strategy. What is strategic? Strategic perspective needs to understand how services provide differentiated value. So as a whole, strategic is forward thinking. It's thinking, okay, where do we want to be? And of course, the subsequent three processes help us to get there. But strategic is thinking forward, just as a takeaway. Being lowest cost provider is not sufficient unless the provider can give a strategic advantage. So what ITIL is saying in the second bullet is basically saying, okay, we cannot just say we're going to provide our services at a lower cost, and that's a means of being strategic. That's the way that we're going to be successful. There should be other things that are provided as a part of your strategic asset and your organizational capabilities that have nothing to do with just being lowest cost. And lastly, means to become not optional. So it's a way of thinking about your organization where people have to have you. They have to do business with you. They're not going to take no for an answer, and they can't find a viable substitute. So it's thinking about those things that differentiate your company or your organization from everyone else in the market. So that's what strategies focus on. Major activities within service strategy: define the market, develop the offerings, develop the strategic assets, which are your resources and capabilities that we talked about, and preparing for execution. So those are the major activities for service strategy. Okay, types of service providers. Type 1 service provider. Let me see if there's a refresh my memory. Know that there's a slide in here on it. Okay, type 1 service providers. It's an internal service provider that is embedded within a business unit. There may be several type 1 service providers within each organization. Each business unit has its own service provider. So if we think about an internal service provider embedded within a business unit, examples of that would be HR, finance, maybe recruiting, accounting. So those would be a type 1 service provider. A type 2 service provider is an internal service provider that provides shared IT services to more than one business unit. So that could be a centralized help desk. And in smaller organizations, it may just be one person or one or two people, but everyone utilizes that service. And a type 3 service provider is a service provider that provides IT services to external customers. Business units take services from different authorized external vendors. So the difference between type 2 and type 3 is that the service provider provides services to external customers. So they may, type 1 and type 2 service providers may sit in the same area. They may share an office or a floor. They may share the same types of tools and technology, but the difference is that a type 3 service provider provides services to an external customer, typically because they're a vendor for another company, or they have a contract with a company to provide services.
What would be an example of some of those services? Like, not necessarily offering a website, like offering a B2B to our external customers, but being the person that does the development of that service?
Yeah, you could be a development or be a part of the development team. You could also do testing for that service provider or external customer, or you could have just some of the people in this type 2 service provider could be split in their time, where it's a matrix team. So they spend 60% of their time providing services internally, and then the other 40% they support an external customer.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. So just to make a note here, when we talk about service providers and customers, ITIL likes to make the distinction, or it points out that you can have internal and external customers. And sometimes when we talked about customers, we're thinking about the people who pay us. We're thinking about a person external to the organization. However, especially with IT service management, you have internal customers. So if we're just not talking IT related, the HR department, for instance, it's a service provider. It provides services to the entire organization. So the rest of the organization are customers of HR. And sometimes in organizations, we don't think that way. We think, oh, well, you know, we'll get to it when we get to it. Or, there's no regard for how we provide services and exhibit professionalism to people internal to our organization. And ITIL is saying, there are tons of different service providers. HR is a service provider, and so they should have defined process. They should measure their process. They should make sure that they're meeting their goals and objectives. They should also be refining their process over time. And so this slide just speaks to the fact that ITIL is notifying people that even internally you can have service providers and customers.
If I think about it through the lens of our organization, we've got a developer, and Envy sits as a brand underneath a brand underneath a parent company, Amer Sports.
Mm-hmm.
And we are our own self-sustaining entity, but then we have all of these additional, shared services. Like I'm an Amer Sports employee, but I work for Envy Composites, but there are people that are just Amer Sports employees.
Mm-hmm.
And we share our dev resource. Like, he's employed by Envy. So the majority of his time is a type 2 service provider, but he may have to go out to Amer Sports, which we would view as a customer in that sense, because they not necessarily a direct, money to our bank-to-bank transaction, but they reimburse